Okay, I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 25th, 2021 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mikulik, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. Roll call. We're going to do a roll call. I will ask our clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Devan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Present.
Councillor Rajima?
I'm here.
Councillor Russell?
Here.
Councillor Brunei?
Here.
Councillor Pachariva?
Here.
Councillor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Mikulik, you're here as chair. Councillor Timmers?
Here.
And Councillor Reimer?
Here.
Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you very much. In addition, I would like to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Our CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, Mike Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Terry Koala, Associate Director of Finance and Administration, Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, Manager of Municipal Law Enforcement, Mike Barkway, Director of Community Services, Shannon McKay, Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Deaney, Director of Public Works, Dave Graham, Lincoln Public Library Chief Executive Officer, Julie Andrews, Town Clerk, Julie Kirkelos, and moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Deputy Clerk, Devan Cripp. We also have IT staff in attendance, always helpful, just in case. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and or clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Councillor Tony Brunei, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call and the clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak when I open it up for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Councillor Brunei, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. I'll be declaring an interest on agenda item number 4.1, the statutory public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment application by 222-8490 Ontario Inc., as well as agenda item 5.31, the accommodating report P25-21, as my son and daughter-in-law are property owners to the adjacent subject lands on 23rd Street. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. I will be declaring interest in on items 4.2 and 5.3.2 in tonight's agenda. Both applicants in these items are customers of the company that I work for.
Thank you very much. Statutory public meetings. We have two statutory public meetings this evening. The purpose of the two meetings is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a zoning bylaw amendment application by 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, CN 3-5-02-03, PLZA CO 202-10064, and the other being Cave Spring Road Allowance Closure and Conveyance Application by Cave Spring Cellars Limited and Malavoir Estate Winery. We will consider the staff report associated with each item immediately after each statutory public meeting. Section 17-15 and 34-12 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan amendment and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must assure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the amendments are approved, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the town of Lincoln to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, or LPAT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and or the minutes of a public meeting, and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of a local planning appeal tribunal LPAT hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our first public meeting is for the purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, CN 3-5-02-03, PLZA C020210064. The clerk will proceed to remove Councillor Brunet from the meeting due to an earlier declared conflict of interest. Madam Clerk, please confirm when we are ready to proceed.
You are ready to proceed.
Okay. Our director, Matt Bruder, you wish to speak to this proposal?
Sure, Mr. Chair. This is a proposal regarding the severance of a couple surplus farm dwellings that the consent was brought before Committee of Adjustment. It was approved. One of the conditions is to rezone the remnant lands for agricultural purposes only, to preclude any residential development on the remnant lands as per regional and town policy. So that's in essence where we are. And the applicant wishes to sever off the two surplus farm dwellings. They're not needed on the property anymore. And as such, they are consolidating their agricultural operations. They own multiple properties throughout the town, and they are now housing them all under one holding company. So those are my comments for this, Councillor. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We stress at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendments, and any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. We have one individual that requested to be included in the public hearing or registered delegations. Ethan Laman, Upper Canada Consultants, has registered to speak to zoning bylaw amendment application by 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, CN 3-5-02-03, PLZA C020210064. Ethan, please go ahead. Thank you for coming.
So good evening, members of council. So I'm Ethan Lamont. I'm a junior planner here at Upper Canada Consultants. We're representing the owner of the property that's subject to this zoning bylaw amendment. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try to keep my comments brief. Matt actually covered a lot of what I was going to say, but I'll just reiterate it. I think the staff report also does a really good job of summarizing the application, and we're happy with the recommendation for approval. So the zoning bylaw amendment application affects the property known as 4241 Victoria Avenue. The property is owned by Maple Leaf Nurseries, who are currently in the process of consolidating their farm holdings. So this application follows a previous application made to the Committee of Adjustment to sever 2 parcels containing residential dwellings from the property, which have become a maintenance and upkeep burden for the farmer. The subject rezoning application is a condition of the approval of this consent application. So the proposed agricultural purposes only zoning is intended to protect the agricultural use of the land. The proposed zoning will restrict the use of the land to only agricultural purposes. The zoning prohibits any further land division and will prohibit the construction of any type of residential dwelling on the land. The passage of the zoning bylaw ensures that the lands can viably support agricultural uses for the long term. So this is really a technical amendment related to permitted uses. And it's not being pursued to facilitate any sort of physical development on the property. So I'm going to leave my comments there. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ethan. Do members of council have any questions for Ethan? If there are, please keep them, to Ethan, as we'll be discussing this later. Thank you. Devan, who do we have first?
Councillor Rajima?
Councillor Njima, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the dwellings that are being severed. Can you tell me when they were built, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the question. I'm not sure exactly when they were built. The town policy requires that they were built prior to 2004, I believe, for them to be severed as a surplus farm dwelling. So the one closest to Victoria Avenue is quite old. And then there's one that is not visible from the street. And based on a site visit, I would say that house was built sometime in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes. And one more question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So for parts 5 and 6, I think it is, there are a couple of other parts. So I think it's part 5 and 6. Are they created for, I'm assuming they're for access easements over the different lots, and then that was taken care of Committee of Adjustment, and we don't need to concern ourselves with that. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. I believe Matt has something to add to that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct, Councillor. That would have been taken care of as part of that process, the Committee of Adjustment process. We're here really is just to fulfill the condition of consent, which is the agricultural purposes only rezoning on the property, on the remnant lands, sorry.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Miklick. Thank you, Ethan, for presenting tonight. You mentioned that it's going to be rezoned to agricultural purposes only and no residential dwellings. Does that include offshore worker housing?
Yes, that would preclude any sort of residential use. Only agricultural purposes, which would be normal farming operations, would be permitted.
Okay, and the remainder buildings that are on their structures, what are they? How are they designated then, or how are they, like, they're just strictly barns now, for lack of a better term, or where do they fall under?
They would be accessory to the agricultural use.
Accessory, and nothing could be put in those. They couldn't be renovated or change of use on those dwellings.
Correct. They would have to support an agricultural operation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ethan. Thank you, Chair Miklick.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further hands. Thank you, Ethan. There is no other information for consideration to this item. I now declare this public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment application by 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, CN 3-5-02-03, PLZA C02021006 closed. Thank you very much. We will move directly into item 5.3.1, report PD-25-21 regarding zoning bylaw amendment application by 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, CN 3-5-02-03, PLZA C02021064. Do members of council have any questions?
Seeing none.
And there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson. Council approved the zoning bylaw amendment application PLZA C02021006 in the name of 222-8490 Ontario Inc., Hoover John Merle, and council declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report analysis and recommendation and finds that subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariba,
Yes.
thank you. Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Support.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you very much. The clerk will proceed to reinstate Councillor Brunet into the meeting as discussion and voting is now completed. Madam Clerk, please confirm when we're ready to proceed.
Thank you. Confirm that Councillor Brunet is back in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our second public meeting is for the purpose of Cave Spring Road Allowance Closure and Conveyance Application by Cave Springs Limited and Malabar Estate Winery. The clerk will proceed to remove Councillor Reimer from the meeting due to an earlier declared conflict of interest. Madam Clerk, please confirm when we're ready to proceed.
You are ready to proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Mr. Bruder, would you care to speak to this one?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So yeah, this is an application brought forward. Mr. Panichetti, who's here now, he is serving as the agent for both Cave Spring Cellars and for Malavoie. So he'll be speaking to it a little bit more, but essentially what this is an application to close and convey the eastern portion of Cave Spring Road, kind of just east of the entrance into the camp, Cave Springs camp, over to the Merritt Road Allowance, the north-south feature. So I'll let Mr. Panichetti speak a little bit further to it, but that's what the application pertains to. Thank you.
Perfect. So we do have one individual that's requested to be included in the public hearing or registered delegations. Len Panichetti, Cave Springs Vineyards Limited, has registered to speak to the Cave Spring Road Allowance Closure and Conveyance application by Cave Springs Cellars Limited and Malabar Estate Winery. Len, thank you for coming. Please go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry.
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council for this opportunity. I'll be brief as well because you've got a thorough staff report in front of you. I guess the main points I want to make is that there are essentially two reasons for this application. The first is that both Malabar and Cave Spring are actively farming the lands in question. And the concern is that if this road allowance were ever opened in the future, it would disrupt the configuration of our vineyards, which have been there for decades, and we hope will be there for many decades to come. So we would like to take that contingency away and thereby be confident that we can continue to farm the acreage as we have for quite some time now. The second reason is that as the tourism industry has flourished in Niagara, we are getting more and more visitors to our sites, but we're also getting members of the public wandering around our site, whether it's the vineyard, or we have various venues where we conduct tours. We conduct, in our case at Cave Spring, we conduct wedding ceremonies. We have paying customers that are using the site for various functions, and we need to control access, especially during those periods when we have functions like that. So that's another reason that has brought us to this point. The staff report is thorough, and we endorse the recommendation of the staff report. And I guess the last thing I'll point out is that no new lots will be created here. As the staff report states at page 20 and 21, no new lots will be created, and the result of the subject application will be a minor adjustment of lot lines. So I think that summarizes the points I wanted to make, but I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions from councilors.
Thank you very much, Len. Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Panichetti? Do not see any hands. All right. Thank you, Len. There is no other information for consideration to this item. I now declare this public meeting to address the Cave Springs Road Allowance Closure and Conveyance application by Cave Springs Cellars Limited and Malivore Estate Winery closed. So we will move directly into item 5.3.2, report PD-26-21 regarding Cave Springs Road Allowance Closure and Conveyance application by Cave Springs Cellars Limited and the Malivore Estate. Do members of council have any questions to this report?
Seeing none.
See any hands up? There being no further discussion. Oh, we got
Sorry,
a couple.
Chair, there.
Okay.
Yes, I have Deputy Mayor Timmers first.
Deputy Mayor Timmers, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was having a hard time finding my hand for a second. I've read the reports, and I personally would be supporting this application. I don't see that it's interfering in any way with any of our trail system. The NPCA comments that they have no objection. Trespassing on private farmland is always an issue. And I could understand Mr. Panichetti wanting to keep people from trespassing across their vineyards for many reasons, just for privacy and for safety of the public. And there seems to be a real increase just recently during COVID with a lot of people trespassing onto private farmland and private property. I personally had somebody trespass on the weekend. They were coming up my driveway on a hike. So it is a real problem. And anyway, personally, I don't see an issue with this application whatsoever, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McPherson, I see your hand.
Mr. Chair, and question through to probably Matt. So took a drive up to take a look, and I think I got to the right area. So there is a little turnaround after the camp. So my question is that Cave Springs Road the town's road, through to that turnaround, or is that in fact Mr. Pettichetti's road?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that turnaround you're talking about, I think, Councillor, at the easternmost kind of where it ends just before the vineyards start.
Right.
Yeah, so that is the town, that's the unopened portion of Cave Springs Road. So it is the town road allowance, but it is the part that is subject, or at least part of the part that is subject to this application. So we do own it. It is our road allowance, but it's the unopened portion.
Okay, so help me. These drawings are generally not very descriptive in these reports. So tell me, where does the road allowance, the unopened road allowance start? I think it was to the east of the Cave Springs Park or Cave Springs Camp.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it actually goes a little bit further west than that. It's kind of probably, I'm just going to do a rough measurement here while I'm looking at it. Probably about, I'm going to say maybe 300 meters to the west of the entrance to the Cave Springs Camp. And I'm just approximating, but something like that. That's the open port where the open portion ends, and the rest of the unopened portion and the turnaround that you saw there. That's what Cave Springs has been maintaining, that turnaround, not the town. It's just on the unopened portion of the road allowance.
Where I'm trying to go with this is where would it be public property where we're maintaining the road, we're shoveling, the snow, we're doing all those things, and then where would this unopened road allowance start?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, it technically, when you look at our mapping, it's kind of at the creek west of the camp, like I said, about 300 meters. But I think that the town has maintained a portion of it leading up to approximately, I think, where the camp entrance is, and Mr. Penichetti can correct me, maybe even further to the west of that. But then I think they've been maintaining the rest in terms of plowing it. I see Mr. Penichetti shaking his head, so maybe he can clarify a little bit, because we were talking about this before. So I'll let him go ahead at Mr. Chair's indulgence.
Okay, Mr. Penichetti, you're still here, so could you please clarify?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to Councilor McPherson. Matt is correct. The unopened portion of the road allowance begins at the bottom of that ravine. If you're driving along Cave Spring Road eastbound, and you pass the turn that leads up to the conservation area, so you're carrying on eastbound, and then you go down into a ravine,
Right.
and then there's a short leg of the Tufford road allowance to your right or to the south, which services one house. And that house is west of the camp. It borders the camp on the west side. So it's at that intersection of Tufford Road and the Cave Spring Road allowance where the public portion ends, where the portion that is maintained by the town ends. So garbage collection ends at that point. Snow removal ends at that point. All the things that are associated with the maintenance of the public road stop at that point. So once you cross the culvert, there's a stream that running through that ravine. I presume the culvert itself is on the unopened portion of the road allowance. The history of this is that many years ago, the camp used to gain access through what's now the conservation area. Many councils will remember Margaret Reed, who used to live in that location, and she terminated their ability to access the camp from that site. So they had to come up with a new access, and this is where they found it. And when we acquired the Etherington farm, which is the farm north of the camp, we approached the town to use the unopened portion of the road allowance to locate a driveway that would service both the camp and ourselves. And the town allowed us to do that, and that's why you see today a driveway that looks much like a public road. I know Dave Graham's here, so I won't make any wisecracks about how well we maintain our roads versus how the town maintains their roads, but certainly it has the appearance of a public road, but it's not. From that point, from that culvert at the ravine going east. It's unopened, and we have maintained that for more than 20 years, 25 years, ever since the town allowed us to construct the driveway on that unopened portion of the road allowance.
So thank you, Len, and through you to Len, maybe again. So we're talking, this particular unopened road allowance request is talking about starting at that point by the creek and going.
No.
No, it's not. So you own a piece of the road there. The town owns a piece of the road, Cave Springs Road, then you own a piece, and then the town has the unopened road allowance beyond.
No, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. The town owns it all from the point I just described all the way to Merritt Road and beyond.
Okay, so you maintain it though?
Correct. It's an unopened road allowance, which we acquired permission from the town decades ago to improve, to serve as our driveway, essentially, to access the camp and our site. The turnaround that you referred to at the beginning of your questioning was constructed by us really as a staging area for harvest when we pick our grapes, and it also functions as a parking area for wedding ceremonies that occur in close proximity to that area you described as a turnaround. So all of the improvements along the road allowance were paid for and built by the camp and ourselves. The portion that's shared was paid for by both the camp and Cave Spring, and the portion that's exclusively fronting on our land was paid for by Cave Spring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Len.
Thank you, Councillor. Probably something I would ask just quickly, is there an effect? Is there a consequence to this from a public works perspective with regards to snow removal or snow clearance as far as the trucks turning around or their ability to turn around? And
Is that addressed to me?
I would say Director Dave Graham.
Yeah.
Through you, Councillor Mikulik, no, there isn't. We currently maintain west of that portion, which Len was speaking about, the Tufford Road allowance, so it would not cause us a problem with our snow removal.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Dave. Councillor Rengiema, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got to ask for a little bit of clarification. There's a visual in the report that on page 3, and it's color coded, very detailed. So it shows that it says in the text below that the green area will merge with lot 3. And the red area will be merged with lot 2. So I'm a little bit confused by that, but I'm wondering why that section, the western section, is split up into a north half and a south half. So that's one question. Another question is, who owns lot 1? Is that Cave Springs or is that Malibor?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So lot 1 is owned by Cave Springs. And I think the reason for the other just adjustment, or the way the lands are proposed to be conveyed, is that was just the preference just at where the road terminates there, just to make sure those lots both have a little bit of access onto there. So that's the only reason. There was no other reason presented, but yeah, lot 1 is owned by Cave Springs as well.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Rengiema. I'm looking at this drawing, Mr. Bruder, and I see like lot 2, there's like 2 red lines. That's one lot complete, right? With the northern part. It's a flagged sort of looking lot.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's the proposed how it would be configured after the fact. So yeah, lot 2, you just see it's that red piece there to the south, and it's just proposed to join up with, you know, part of the road allowance there would be attached to it in the end.
Okay. It's okay. It's just that when I was looking at the drawing, it looked like there was two red lines, north, south, east, west. So. Okay. Councilor Brunei.
Chair Michalek, through you to the Director of Planning. Mr. Bruder, we have a town road allowance and still policy that we look at when these type of things come up. And one of the two criterias that we look at, a lens that we look at, is when there's a continuous linear corridor running to a body of water, or traversing the Niagara Escarpment. So with that in mind, I attended the property earlier today, and you know, there's no question that the road allowance essentially runs parallel to the escarpment feature. However, I understand that both you and Director Graham have attended the site, have walked the site, and I'm wondering, in your opinion, if you could comment on whether there is any impact to the trail network or any active transportation in light of this potential conveyance road allowance.
Mr. Bruder.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Excellent question, Councillor. And yeah, definitely, you know, you're exactly right when we talk about the road allowance closure and conveyance policy that we have in place. So in acknowledging those criteria that you mentioned, Director Graham and I did attend the site. We walked it. We walked the trail network that's within that escarpment feature to the south, including how you access it. And through that exercise, we determined that the subject portion of road allowance didn't offer any connectivity over and above what's already there within that trail network. People didn't need to utilize this particular road allowance to access that trail network. There were other means of access, and there was multiple paths through there. As a matter of fact, as Mr. Penichetti stated earlier, the unopened portion of the road allowance on the east going over towards Merritt Road goes through some vineyards. So there's no real value from an active transportation point of view, considering that there's already a trail network within the escarpment, and this doesn't really, it runs parallel, but it doesn't really provide a direct linkage formally into that. So these things considered, we were satisfied that it didn't really, it wasn't a crucial piece to that particular area for the trail network.
Thank you, Director Bruder. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair Michalek.
You're welcome, Councilor Brunei. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Timmers that council receive for information report PD-26-21 regarding the road closure and conveyance application by Cave Springs Vineyard Limited and the Malivoire Wine Company Limited, and that the recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Brunei,
Yes.
Councilor McPherson,
Yes.
Councilor Michalek,
Yes.
Councilor Pachariva,
Councilor Patrick.
Councilor Pachariva,
You look like
Yes.
thank you. Councilor Rajima,
Yes.
Councilor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Support.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. The clerk will proceed to reinstate Councilor Reimer to the meeting as discussion and voting is now completed. Madam Clerk, please confirm when ready to proceed.
Thank you. We are ready to proceed.
Okay, thank you. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of the agenda and will now continue with the planning and economic development agenda. Delegations, there are no registered delegations this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Item 5.2 consent agenda. There are no consent agenda items this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. 5.3 reports. We will now consider item 6.3.3 municipal law enforcement quarterly update. Do members of council have any questions regarding Mr. Barkway's report? I don't see. Oh, okay. Who do we have first, Devan?
It looks like we have Councillor Bernay first.
Councillor Bernay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. Through you to Mr. Barkway. Excellent report. I'm really pleased to see this. It's a bit of an eye opener to see the number of complaints that we've had in the first quarter. Through you, Chair, my first question to Mr. Barkway would be, I see the breakdown and the different areas of complaints, parking, COVID-19, property standards. I don't see anything with regards to cannabis odor. I had some complaints, especially in the last 4 to 6 weeks. I'm wondering if Mr. Barkway could just comment on where those cannabis odor complaints fall in and possibly why they're not in this breakdown.
Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Yeah, there have been some cannabis odor complaints. However, prior to the inception of the nuisance odor bylaw, the public nuisance bylaw, there was very little ground for us in order to cover these off. In the first quarter of 2021, we did receive 5 cannabis-related calls or complaints. 2 of them actually were inquiries, and 3 related to cannabis cultivation and or odor complaints from various locations. Those complaints received are being continued, but they would fall within the remainder of the complaints that were varied in nature. However, they were very small in the numbers. But there was approximately 5, and of those 3 of them were actually complaints and 2 were just inquiries.
Councillor Bernay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Barkway. Through you, Chair Michalak, if I could just have a couple more questions, if I could just continue. Through you, Mr. Barkway. So, obviously this report indicates that we have quite an uptick in the number of complaints in Q1 of 2020 to Q1 of 2021, 165 up to 330. Quite a significant increase, I think we'd all agree. And obviously, COVID, I'm sure has had its impact here in many regards. I'm just wondering whether, and obviously, Mr. Barkway is new in his position, fairly new in his position. I'm just wondering if we have any historical data that would compare as to whether this significant increase from 2020 to 2021 is a blip on the radar, or is this something that we can expect to see moving forward?
Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for that question as well. Yes, I am new to the position, but going back through the reporting system that's in place, I'm not sure exactly when this reporting system came in place, but I know it was back when the officers were actually just contracted. I believe the contracting ended in June of 2016. And then there was one full-time manager / full-time officer that was hired in September of 2016. And then there were part-time officers hired in 2017. And the first full-time officer was hired in 2019. So going back through the reporting system that was in place, I don't think it would be fair for me to go back to 2016 or 2017 to look at the reportings that were done back then. They're done differently than what's being done now. It's being taken in. I can say in the first quarter of 2019, there were 53 complaints that were received in the quarter, as opposed to what I've reported this year, 130, and of the previous year, 165. So it does look like it's steadily increasing. However, I couldn't go back prior to that and make sense of how the reporting system was. So I only go with the data that was sensical, unfortunately. But it does appear year to year that the at least the first quarter from what I've looked at so far has increased steadily each year.
Okay.
Councillor Fang?
Thank you for that. And, you know, the report is, you know, I think the report has an underlying tone to it, and I completely understand, you know, the nature of that. I'm actually quite sympathetic to what your bylaw officers are probably going through right now. I think it's probably attuned to, you know, just running around and trying to keep, you know, the complaints, you know, handled as best as possible. But I think we'd all agree in certain areas, and I think your report indicates that, Mr. Barkway, that, you know, when it comes to certain things like parking, you know, in snow areas in the wintertime and parking on roads, you know, that those are areas that we want to, you know, be especially attentive to. And I know you guys are doing the best, but, you know, I think at some point here, you know, the rubber has to hit the road where we have to make a decision as to whether we need to add officers, because I think at least I've had a number of complaints saying, you know, not saying that bylaw is not doing a good job, certainly not indicating that in any way, but that, you know, people are saying, you know, if it's clearly marked that there's no parking, we don't need a complaint to tell us to go out there and start doing some enforcement. So I know you're doing the best you can with what you've got, the tools you've got, but I hope that at some point, if you see a need for more staff and more officers, that you come back to us with that, because I think we're certainly hearing that from our residents, but certainly appreciate and respect the job that you and your officers are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brunei. Who do we have next, Devan?
It looks like we have Councillor Rajima.
Councillor Renchiema. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the detailed report. Yeah, a couple of things stood out to me, and one is that a big difference between Q4 of 2020 and Q1 of 2021 in terms of numbers of complaints. I'm wondering if some of that might be related to the stay-at-home order. But anyway, there's been a big jump. And another thing that stood out to me is the amount of consultation that you do on a regular basis with other departments in the municipality in order to conduct a solid review. I appreciate you making that clear. And I have a question, two questions, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. One is related to, so there's the breakdowns of the types of complaints and where they fall. And similar to Councillor Brunei, I have a question about quote unquote light pollution. Where would that fall?
Mr. Barkway?
Through you, Chair. Prior to the public nuisance bylaw coming into effect, there was no avenue for a municipal law enforcement officer to complaints of light nuisance or light pollution. So the Minister of the Environment would get there was light pollution per se, and that would still be the case depending on the situation. But thankfully now, moving forward after this first quarter with the enacting of the public nuisance bylaw, there is a light trespass nuisance or a light trespass nuisance portion or section to the bylaw. We're able to address lighting complaints. I believe when I was speaking to the bylaw itself, I gave an example of a business that had lighting that was trespassing into adjacent residential properties, and it was more or less a mediated sort of outcome by myself to the through the business and the residents in the area. Unfortunately, we had no teeth trying to do some mediation. Now we do, and we can either work at mitigating the situation, or if there's non-compliance, we can actually lay charges. But there was nothing in this first quarter in regards to light complaints.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I remember you actually mentioning that before, and so I appreciate that clarification. And I have a question about, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, one more question. And that's related to the investigation of a zoning related complaint. If, for example, you had approached someone about a zoning related infraction, and then they had indicated that they were going to apply for a zoning amendment to bring the use into compliance, is there a time frame that you would have in mind to meet compliance, or is that always on a case-by-case basis?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. The time frame, it would depend in that situation if they are requesting to have something done through zoning in order to seek a variance or have a hearing. Then the investigation itself would be put on hold until such time as there's a determination made from that hearing.
Mhm.
If there isn't anything, or if there's no indication that that's going forward, the minimum amount of time we can give for an order is 15 days. And depending on the situation, there could be additional time granted for that.
So to paraphrase, as long as things are moving along, you're willing to work with people, and as long as it appears that they're taking steps to bring their zoning into compliance, then you work with them.
Chair, absolutely. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, we have
Looks like Deputy Mayor Timmers is next.
Deputy Mayor Timmers. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to Mr. Barkway. Thank you very much for the report. I was a little surprised by some of the numbers. There was a big jump in some of the areas. My only question is around the mice and rat program. So I noticed in 2020, Q4 2020, there were 7, and then in Q1 2021, there were 5. Are these people who actually use the program, or just people who phoned about the program?
Mr. Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. That would incorporate it's people that contacted our office in relation to a rodent problem, and they were then educated in regards to the residential rodent removal rebate program, and they can make a determination themselves not if something they want to follow through with or not.
Have you had anyone follow through with the program at all?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we have. I don't know the numbers for the fourth quarter, but I believe the first quarter of 2024.
Okay, well, that's great. It seems like just education on how to prevent is probably working by the sense of things. So anyway, I found that interesting. Thank you, Mr. Barkway, for your comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, or Deputy Mayor. Next, we have
Mayor Easton next.
Mayor Easton. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Barkway, for the comprehensive report. There's certainly a lot of activity going on. I was interested in Councillor Brunet's comment about the tone behind the report. I would certainly agree with that. There's a lot of change in what is happening, and it certainly sounds like there's a lot of pressure points. I'm curious to know, under the issue of compliance, which I'm beginning to wonder if this isn't really something where at times you may have to go in to deal with issues of officer safety. Are we reaching the point where there are circumstances that land use violations require us to bring in the Niagara Regional Police Services because of non-compliance?
Mr. Barkway.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the question. Officer safety is very close and strong from my career background. And I don't take it lightly at all. Officers that we have working, as I identified, currently right now we have 2 full-time officers in the midst of our final 3rd full-time officer starting the beginning of June. Anytime we have compliance inspections, we are at the point where we are trying to schedule those when there are our office, so the 3 of us are in, so that there's at least 2 officers and myself that will attend. And yes, I can speak personally to 2 attendances properties where going through all the facts and issue and the information that was known about the property or the property owners. The determination was made for officer safety to involve both the Niagara Regional Police and one of the properties, also the Niagara SPCA Humane Society. They attended twice with us for a specific property, just for that reason, for officer safety. My officers have been instructed by myself many times. It's almost a weekly conversation we have in regards to officer safety, and they won't attend without making me aware, and we can discuss options and routes that we can take to deal with them prior to things escalating beyond their control. And they're also very well aware about de-escalation techniques. We have utilized the Niagara Regional Police as well as other agencies for various attendances, especially for compliance checks.
Right. Do you, I think you've been here long enough to know what the lay of the land is. In your estimation, would you say that there are circumstances that contribute to land use violations that council should be aware of in order to potentially review some of the bylaws that are related to those matters, or even if we don't have a bylaw that we should have?
Barkway?
Through you, Chair. I believe there's always going to be issues or circumstances that come up in different investigations where there may not be something that's applicable from one of our bylaws currently. And those situations are reviewed. If it's not something that is applicable to one of our bylaws that we have in place right now, in the majority of cases, there's some other legislation that does lend itself to giving us some authority to do something. Let's say the light trespass, then there's a lot of circumstances where I insert myself and try and do some mediation just to try and seek some sort of mitigation to help all sides on that. I can't think of anything offhand where I would suggest that there's anything that's not in place right now that should be in place, but I'm sure there are some. And I'm sure some of them are just escaping my thought process right now. But
that's quite all right. I didn't ask you the question in advance. About the, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question about the site alteration bylaw.
Go ahead.
Mr. Barkway, I believe there's a lot of activity in this area. It would be helpful, I believe, if there were the potential of having some case studies developed for council so that we can understand better what the circumstances are around site alteration and some of the challenges that are taking place. I'm particularly interested in this from the perspective of there being potentially a contribution to agricultural land becoming unproductive. I've certainly heard commentary through some of the tenant farmers about land that they would not put seed in because of what's been dumped there. That's not a slight against what you've been doing. It's merely a question and more detail on what's going on out there. I think it would be in our best interest as a Center of Excellence for Agriculture. So have you been thinking about anything different in that regard that we can do?
I'm going to let Mr. Barkway answer that quickly, and then I see Matt Bruder has put his hand up as well. He can provide perhaps further comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. for the question. I actually think it's a good idea that I could, with the help of managers, put something together just to an educational component for council to make them aware of the hurdles that we face in the investigations that go in, both for site alteration and for, in a lot of cases, zoning. I think I did kind of outline some of the steps that are taken in zoning and what comes up. Site alteration isn't one where it's just specific to the bylaw officers. A lot of time we need other people to come in from the different departments, more experts in their field to check in regards to fill, drainage. It goes well beyond what the law enforcement officer can do or and is expected to do. But those experts come under the authority of the municipal law enforcement officer onto the during an inspection. That's granted through the municipal act itself. So, but it is something I'm willing to look at putting something together to try and provide a more detailed overview for it. That's what's much.
Bruder, do you have something further to add to that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Barkway touched on most of what I wanted to say, just in that when we approach these site alteration files, permit applications, or responding to an incident, as Mr. Barkway laid out, it's very multidisciplinary. Lots of different staff involved from different departments. There's different factors involved, but it also ranges in terms of the need for the site alteration in the first place. A lot of farmers wishing to improve drainage. Sometimes it's to build berms, wind protection. It goes on and on. So I think, to your point, your worship, just a little bit of a case study analysis might lay out some of those different scenarios and provide you with a bit of clarity. And the only other comment I would make now is, since we've strengthened our site alteration bylaw as of last year, now we're a lot more stringent with respect to what needs to be provided to us for our permit process in terms of records of soil, where it's come from, you know, how it's been tested and whatnot. We require that information as well in further detail than I think perhaps was the practice before. So I also wanted to highlight that for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is all very helpful, and I look forward to being able to review those case studies. I think they'll be very helpful, very instructive. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Barkway. Again, thank you very much for all this data in particular. Just a couple quick questions. First one being, I know that, again, and I appreciate you guys are a little shorthanded right now, considering the number of complaints that are coming in. So great job on the effort your team is putting together. Just wondering, without giving any intel to any potential scofflaws out there, but what is the scheduling like of yourself and your officers throughout the week? Again, are we going heavy Monday to Friday, or is it, how do you guys kind of figure out, or how does your team, I don't want to say guys, how does your team figure out exactly where schedules should be permitted by the day?
Do we want to answer that question?
Well, that's,
what are your thoughts? Go ahead.
Sorry, maybe I can rephrase that. Do you feel that maybe with the addition of that third person coming on, that again, we will be well covered for especially weekend calls coming? Because I know, just anecdotally from the calls that I receive, it seems to be usually Monday to Sunday, or sorry, Friday to Sunday. And I just want to hit on that point in case anybody out there is listening, that we do have adequate coverage during that time. Very good point, Mr. Chair.
We're going to find out. Go ahead, Mr. Barkway.
Chair, thank you. Yes, there is coverage through municipal law enforcement through the week and through the weekend, both during the day and into the evening. And to the extent where right now, when you consider the calls for service, the amount of complaints that come in, the workload that the officers are dealing with daily, weekly, monthly right now, for them to be able to still patrol and do proactive and interact with the community, they're trying the very best they can. And I have to commend them for that. They're doing an exceptional job. In regards to when there's officers on the road, officers on the road during the day and in the evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays when we identify that there's a need for them at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barkway. I see Mr. Bruder's got his hand up too.
Mr. Bruder, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to commend the enforcement staff too, because they've often proven to have been very nimble too, making sure that they do have coverage, especially not so much now with the pandemic upon us, but even previously when we had special events that came up and they were perhaps going a little later into the evening, we were always ensuring that we had coverage there too. So staff have done a great job with making sure that they, although they are stretched maybe a touch thin at times, but they definitely are still responsive and they're still maintaining their presence throughout the community. So I agree, they've done a great job.
One further question, Mr. Chair. This one probably
Yes.
not nearly as sensitive. But again, with regards to the Niagara SPCA, we do get a lot of complaints, especially in Ward 1, about off-leash dogs at some of our wonderful parks. I'm just wondering, again, if you have any thoughts on, again, how we may be able to better either make our awareness to our residents out there increased, or just our presence out there. We get a lot of concerns raised that once they call the Niagara SPCA, it takes sometimes a half hour for them to respond. By that time, the person or persons and their pooches are no longer at the park. So just wondering what your thoughts are on that and how we can better make ourselves known in that regard.
Barkway.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I've had many conversations with the Niagara SPCA Humane Society, who was our contracted agency for animal care and control. And I can say that categorically, they make themselves available. They do a lot of patrolling in areas where they know there's been problems in the past. But they also do a lot of reactive in regards to complaints that they receive. Yes, there'll be a time delay between the time they receive a complaint and the time they can respond to it. But I do know these officers are changing their schedules, where some of them are attending at 5 o'clock in the morning based on complaints. That's not a normal time for Niagara SPCA Humane Society to be out and patrolling. So they are making themselves extremely responsible and responding to different areas numerous times. They do hours and hours of patrolling all the time. And I can give you an example without going into details, where I have received complaints about off-leash complaints in the town of Lincoln, and there is no enforcement. And generally, I will have just as many people then calling and complaining that they're being issued tickets because of the enforcement that's being done for off-leash dogs in parks. So I think it's a credit to the Niagara Humane Society, Niagara SPCA and Humane Society, for the job that they're doing. And it's much like the municipal law enforcement responding to bylaw complaints. It's not going to be an immediate response. You don't generally get an immediate response from police unless it's a life or death situation. So there is going to be a time delay. It's going to be based on availability of the officers. The officers from the SPCA also cover other areas as well, but they always ensure that there's officers available for this area to cover this area off through normal general patrol. And like I've explained, even altering their schedules to fit when the complaints are being received. So I think they're doing a great job. I speak with them all the time and get a lot of feedback from them, and I provide them a lot of feedback from what we're getting of this way with it. So much like my office, I wish they had more officers, but that comes with time.
Thank you, Mr. Barkway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be very brief. Again, like everybody else, Mr. Barkway, thank you very much. Really strong report, lots of detail here. And I guess when looking at the numbers, I think we can get caught up in the overall number, sometimes to a fault. You know, I appreciate that you did put in there Q1 of 2020, that there was 165 total complaints. And I think if you look at the list we've got, we can probably take out all or most of the COVID complaints out of 2020. That really hit like in March of 2020. And we probably, then that's basically where that Q1 ends, is at the end of March. So 85 complaints off of the 330 number. We start to come closer to that 165 number that we had last year. Where I'm going with this is the comparison of quarter to quarter doesn't tell us the story necessarily. That it would, in a trend, it would that if we had a full year of quarters and we trended it, it would tell us the story. But 90 parking tickets in Q1 versus 52 parking tickets in Q4 really doesn't cover. If you looked at those parking tickets, I guess I would ask the question, how many were because of snow removal? And the snow removal generally runs from November 15th to April 15th. So it's primarily a quarter Q1 issue. So I guess when looking at these things that would raise my question is clean yards has doubled. 12 from 6 to 12. Why is that? What's happening with clean yards? Zoning is more than double. So those types of things I would look at. Snow clearing. Well, again, we are in the Q4 of last year. We might not have had a snowfall, and in the Q1 of this year, that's where all our snow clearing was. So, although 39 complaints is a lot of complaints, but I just would suggest that and hopefully we've got the data that we can sort of look at a annual look at this thing, go back for 4 quarters and see what was the previous Q1 versus Q1 of this year and how do they compare, to see if we've got actually an issue or if it mirrors very much what we did last year. Does that make sense?
I think you're seeking like more of a seasonal sort of report.
There definitely is some seasonality to some of this. And certainly, the whole COVID piece, we're all expecting that this will go away, at some point in the not too distant future, that we will be opened up and that, life will start to come back to what was our lives prior to March of 2020. So that 85 and 32 number will disappear completely, we would expect. So just some observations. Mr. Brockway, I love the detail, love all the, the reasoning and the detail on each one of the numbers. Appreciate the report. And that would be my only suggestion, is that if we've got the data, show it as what happened in those 165 that you listed for Q1 of 2020. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brockway. That's possible in the future, I'm thinking.
Through you, Chair. Absolutely. These will get better as I gather more experience through this. Respectfully, I would say that I note that the COVID calls do take up quite a bit of the calls, the complaints that are received. Respectfully, I would add that I don't know if it's fair to say that we should just take them out of the equation, because they're there and this has been going on for over a year now. So it is part of the process for the municipal law enforcement to enforce these, to investigate these. It's part of what's coming to municipal law enforcement and downloaded on bylaws since day one. So March 12th of 2020. This is not a new thing or a 1 quarter event. This has been going on for more than a year now. It's not going to go away next month. We're going to continue to have these complaints. We're going to continue to have these investigations go to as numbers rise. Number of complaints rise because gathering limits are at this point, or at X point, or people aren't wearing a mask at this point. My officers still have to attend those calls. So whether they're happening 3 years from now or they may not be, but for now it's realistic to say they're in there because that's what they're responding to. The pride I take is the fact that my officers have instilled in them the suggestion that I brought to them in discussions early on, that we engage, communicate, and educate prior to any sort of actual fine or enforcement or charges being laid. And that's been a very proactive, very professional approach by my office and my officers to everybody that we've dealt with in relation to COVID events and in regards to all the other calls for service that we have.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may respond to that, and Mr. Barkley, if I led you to want you to take these out and not recognize them, my error. That's not what I'm suggesting you do. But where I am going with this is there is discussion about adding bodies to this team. And, you know, I think we've got to really look at a longer period of time, and we've got to take into consideration that there's no question that COVID has dominated, and your team has done a great job in managing through that very difficult time. But we're all expecting that will start to ease up as the provincial government opens up, you know, the province again. So, and people aren't going to be calling because, 10 people are gathering, because now, there's 50 people that are allowed to gather. So my point is, if we're going to be talking about adding bodies, these types of things need to be taken into consideration longer term. That was where I was going with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. Thank you, Mike, for the report. Quick comment and a quick question. I really like in your COVID-19 section of the report, I like the phrase engagement and education to gain compliance. I think that's a great strategy. I like that approach. Just curious, what's the feedback been on those COVID-19 interactions? Like, what's the temperature of the conversation, or what have those interactions been like? Just curious. If you can comment on that.
Mr. Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the comment and for the question. I would say 99.9% of the interactions we've had. However, how heated the beginning was, by the end of it, the approach my officers have taken have de-escalated situations, and I haven't had any follow-up complaints from anybody who's had an interaction with the officers in regards to their dealings with them and how they've approached the situation. Mainly through businesses, I get feedback about the involvement of my officers or myself in regards to answering questions related to COVID and how it affects the business and what they can do and strategies and what the changes to the legislation and the restrictions mean every 14 or 28 days when it changes. So it's been very positive feedback, actually, along.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of positive feedback from businesses and just a question from sort of the general public how those conversations went. So that's great to hear. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair McLean.
Thank you. Mr. Bruder, you raised your hand quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to just dovetail on Mr. Barkway's comments and just say that part, especially, I think that's a big piece of the customer service aspect of this department that we've continued to grow and to offer. I know, just by what Mr. Barkway described, a lot of our residents have come to respect that approach, a solutions-focused approach to some of these issues. It's a difficult job for sure to come to a solution sometimes, but I think council can be definitely assured and proud that our bylaw team always approaches it through that lens. So just wanted to add those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik, through you to Mr. Barkway. Mr. Barkway, thank you very much for this. You've been on the police side and now on the municipal side. And if people followed rules, we'd have a happy place, wouldn't we? But you'd be out of a job. So, but that's the crux of all of this is there's rules, but a lot of them, well, the rules aren't for me. No, the rules are for everyone. So thank you for this. And question, with snow clearing and, emergency vehicles not being able to get through. And the last couple of years, we've tried keep the road clear when there's going to be snow. Any thoughts of and we have a ban in cul-de-sacs from, I think, November 30th to April 1st. Any thoughts of an on-street parking ban to, for the winter, to actually make snow removal quicker, easier, less painful?
Mr. Barkway.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the comments and for the question. Ironically enough, I'm reviewing the snow clearing, and I've actually had discussions. I've reached out to the surrounding municipalities, municipal law enforcement officers, to get a perspective from each of their respective areas in regards to how their enforcement is through the winter, what they do with snow clearing, what their parking enforcement is, so I can get all that, have all that information together, put a report together with it, and make a determination whether or not there's a necessity to make a change, an amendment for the parking in regards to snow clearing in the winter. It would have to be something where there would be some sort of a time frame after a snow event, where this would be free from vehicles. One, for emergency vehicles to get through, but also for the snow clearing itself. So it is something that I'm looking at. We're doing some research with, and as I said, reached out to the other municipalities to get their input and see what they have in place at this point. I'm going to go from there with it, and hopefully you guys will be hearing about it shortly.
Okay, that's terrific. Through you, Mr. Chairman, because, talking to some of our snowplow operators, it would make their life easier. And when you get that telephone call that, Mrs. Smith that lives on Brown Street, her street hasn't been plowed. Well, that's because they've had to zigzag out of in between these cars. So it would just expedite the efficiency of not only your operation, but Public Works's. Just another question through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
I haven't spoke tonight, so I'm saving it up.
Don't repeat other questions.
Councillor Mikulik, come on, it's me.
Make it a new one.
Through you to Mr. Barkway, and I know we've been going back and forth and along with Mr. Bruder, developing a clean yards with respect to ag properties. And this is this fine line, right? We tend to give ag properties a pass, but the neighbor that lives beside Sanford's junkyard or the wreck of the Hesperus isn't really too keen about it. So I know that you've been contacting other municipalities for their thoughts on it, but and I was talking to Mr. Bruder last week, and we developed our official plan because we are a center for excellence in agriculture. So rather playing follow the leader on that one, I'd like us to develop our own policy, stick our flag in the sand and say, okay, everyone follow us. So just your thoughts on that, because it's, and I know you've probably got a shopping list of chronic offenders, be it clean yards, be it unkept grass, be it snow clearing. And Councillor Russell used my word, the scofflaws just thumb their nose to authorities. So just looking for a little insight.
Certainly an interesting question. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Barkway. Any consideration?
Through you, Chair. The Clean Yards bylaw that we have right now covers both residential and agricultural. As you expressed, I am looking at other municipalities in regards to that. We are reviewing those things. As it stands right now, we are standard with all the other municipalities in regards to the enforcement and what is actually being done. So I believe what you're referring to is whether or not a property would be fully cleared or whether there's a perimeter.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is if we're getting into agricultural properties, they're getting highly intrusive. If you're looking at doing more than as a border strip, that's defined in the Clean Yards bylaw as standard, and the rest of the land would be looked at as being naturalization lands, and that's defined in the bylaw as well.
But and through you, Chair Mikulik, and this is where I'm taking a different tact on it. So I get a farm that's in operation or is being worked, yes, but one that's been derelict or remnant hasn't been operation for 5 years or more. I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow for the resident or residents that sit beside it, naturalized. 10 feet of weeds, in my opinion, isn't naturalized. So that's something I'd like us to look at, down the road, and maybe we come up with active farming, rules for active farming and rules for derelict properties. And again, we if we're the Center for Excellence in Agriculture, let's develop a standard for that, and then let's go out and say, hey, we're tackling this issue, and let's take the lead. So thank you.
That could possibly be something that Mr. Barkway and Mr. Bruder can discuss next time they're having a meeting. Councilor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. I just wanted to very quickly add a couple of comments. I wanted to reinforce Mayor Easton's comment. As one of the Ward 2 councilors, where we get a lot of agricultural property above the escarpment, I've had a tremendous amount of calls with regards to dump trucks and site alteration. So I just want to reiterate Councilor or Mayor Easton's comments that I really think some sort of an education, I forget the word she used, but I completely agree with her comments that some education for council to understand the site alteration would be very, very beneficial moving forward. And through you, Chair, I just wanted to also just make a comment with regards to Councilor McPherson's comments. I agree. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to trends and data. I would say, and I think Councilor Pachariba would agree with me, 2014 to 2018, compared to our second term or my second term, 2018 to current, exponentially has increased with bylaw complaints. To me, it's not about COVID. When you look at the data, 240 out of 330 complaint locations in Beamsville, 73%. I would love to know if that's a correlation to be where that's the population, or if that's all about development. Because I want to make a comment. We get lots of calls, whether it's on Connor Drive, where people can't park on Connor Drive because they don't have their site alteration permits in their backyards, and their fences haven't been fixed, and so they're parking on the road. And I just want to really take my hat off to both bylaw and planning, who have worked collaboratively together to come up with solutions. We've had dozens and dozens and dozens of complaints over the last 6 months with illegally parked cars in Cache, where the developer is obviously paving the new driveways, and there's 40 cars parked illegally. Our phones are ringing off the hook, but bylaw is working in conjunction with planning to come up with solutions, and not go up there and ticket people, but work with people to come up with solutions. So I believe that a lot of our situations, especially in Ward 2, are directly related to development and issues related to new driveways, parking at Prokich, and it hasn't been easy to navigate. But between bylaw and between planning, we've been able to come up with some solutions for these residents. So I just wanted to make that notation. I think a lot of it is related to development, but we're working well for solutions for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So I don't see any other hands up. Clearly, this report is an important one. Everyone has spoken to it. Many providing terrific feedback, compliments. Our bylaws, they're going to get busier, certainly with the upcoming summer. I appreciate, and I'm sure everyone appreciates, the effort they make and the jobs they perform. I'm just, in further listening to some of the feedback, I'm just wondering if Mr. Barkway, you mentioned with regards to complaints that are bylaw related and complaints that are that are not bylaw related. Do we track those? Do we keep numbers on those complaints as well? I take, for example, you mentioned the cannabis complaints as well as the nuisance light complaints, like complaints that don't have a bylaw attached to them. Do we track those complaints as well?
Thank you, Chair. The complaints that have been, that I've tracked on this were actually about were themselves. Anything that we look into, if there's an investigative process involved before it's determined that it isn't something that would be ours, that still would be listed as a complaint, even if they're then referred to another agency. And that could be the MOE, that could be the region for fouling of the roads. But there is a portion that's involved with the MLE itself first, or a portion of it. We may then work in conjunction with another agency, or we then may refer it to another agency. If there's one that's absolutely nothing right from the beginning that has to do with bylaw, no, that's not tracked by us, other than it would be I mean, I think it wouldn't be something where we put a recorded thing within our filing system for those.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just trying to get a good idea of just how busy you really are, like, you know, on top of the mentioned complaints that are in your reports. So that's where I was getting at. Anyways, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rajema that council receive for information PD-2 report PD-27-21 regarding municipal law enforcement quarterly update. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Yes.
That carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There being no additional reports to consider for the Planning and Economic Development Committee, we have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Councillor and Chair Paul McPherson to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik, and welcome to the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. Delegations, there is one registered delegation this evening. Julie Andrews, CEO of the Lincoln Public Library, and Donna Burton, the Library Board Chair, are in attendance to speak to the Lincoln Public Library 2020 Annual Report and the Strategic Plan Update. Julie and Donna, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think Donna's going to begin.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Both Julie and I are pleased to join you this evening to give you an update on the library's activities and priorities. I'm the current chair of the library board, and of course, you know Julie very well as CEO of the Lincoln Public Library. Our board is extremely proud of the way that Julie and her staff have been able to constantly pivot in this past pandemic year to not only deliver exceptional service to our community, but have also found time to plan and introduce new initiatives and services during very challenging times. To start our presentation, I'm very pleased to show you this new video that was created by library staff, which highlights the accomplishments of the past year. Then Julie will give you a brief update on our strategic plan activities and some insight into what new initiatives are to come. So we'll be happy, of course, to answer questions at the end. So if I may ask the clerk to roll the video, please.
No problem. Give me one moment. Can you see that okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Devan, for taking care of that. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. Donna talked a little bit about what we were going to do after the video, and we're going to keep it brief because I know what's on TV right now just as much as you do. So what I have is a brief, very brief strategic plan update. First, good evening to you all. In addition to our video form, that was our annual report in brief. We're now going to talk a little bit about the progress we've made toward our strategic goals for Lincoln Public Library in the last year. In spite of, some difficulties that were encountered with COVID-19, we managed to develop and deliver programs and service improvements and move toward the completion of many of our strategic goals. There are 4 pillars that we have identified, and they are enrich, shine, connect, and develop. So Devan, if you could put those slides up for us and we can take a quick look. I'm not about to read all these slides to you. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what they say and what our goals are going forward and what we've managed to accomplish. So if we could move to the next one, which is our first pillar, enrich community engagement with vibrant spaces, programs, and partnerships. So as the mayor was talking about earlier, the shade sails are up and they're creating a really welcome respite from the constant sun in this area over at Fleming. It's a great place to recharge. A lot of people stop by and have their lunch. We've just been awarded a successful grant application for over $20,000, and we'll be able to purchase some outdoor furnishings and tables so that we can facilitate small programs and gatherings outside this summer and beyond. Our new mobile branch, which is going to make a debut very soon, lovingly called Rosie, is a repurposed town van that is being redecorated as we speak, and it will enable the library to be where it currently isn't. So I've talked about this before with you all. Camden, Tintern, Rockaway, Jordan. We're going to deliver books, materials, do some programming throughout Lincoln this spring and summer and beyond. I'll talk about our summer reading club. More improvements are planned for the longer term at the Vineland branch as well. In your address a couple of weeks ago, Mary Easton, you referred to the creation of exceptional gathering spaces to inspire the community. And we have a similar vision. And we've entitled this project Rittenhouse Reimagined. So a community engagement plan and a capital campaign will begin later this year. Next slide, please. The next pillar is to shine a light on the library's contribution for residents, council, and business. New branding and a new, much improved, we can go again, Devan, thanks. New branding and a new and much improved website have created a virtual branch that's open 24/7. Our members can sign up for a program and pay their fees now and create a new library card all online. And of course, they can search for and place holds on items of interest. The library has purchased some terrific new software as well. It'll enable us to proceed with targeted marketing for our programs and services. And our makerspace will be out on the road in the community this summer with programs for all ages. Next slide, please. Pillar number 3 is connect. And we've been hard at work during the pandemic, ensuring that our members are connecting with our collections. Increased emphasis on materials, hotspots to borrow. We've done a diversity audit of our materials so that we're offering both a mirror and a window for our community, as well as increased functionality of our website. These have all been major improvements. And next slide, please. Develop a strong culture of innovation. Also very important to keep our staff engaged during this pretty difficult time, when we were all separated, trying to do our work. We've really developed a strong culture of innovation diligently over the pandemic. Our staff have taken hundreds of courses, webinars, workshops, all to sharpen their skills and develop new areas of expertise. The new virtual reality that we found ourselves in offered challenges and opportunities. So they've learned a lot of new skills over this time, and we are really excited about what the future holds for our programming. So that's it, quick and to the point. We're so happy to be with you tonight and just to offer this very quick update on what we've been up to, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, excuse me. So thank you, Julie and Donna. Very nice presentation, and don't worry at all about the Leafs. They're I'm sure with all these Leaf fans, they're okay. They're
I'm
saying
sure we've got it well in
good
here.
vibes. So, do we have any questions from council?
Yes, Councillor Patrick
Enough?
Reeves' hands up first.
The two board members are queuing up there first in line. So is that the way it went, Madam Deputy Clerk?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Yes, that's because we are so enthused to be part of the Lincoln Public Library Board. You know, as your longest serving counselor, this is the best presentation I have ever seen from the library. You know, we've went to the OLA super conferences, and I have become a disciple of the library. I'm trying to read, and they say, don't come and bore council with numbers. They don't want to see numbers. So, I mean, the video was dynamite. Just the things that the library is doing under guidance of the board, and of course, Julie, our CEO, is transformational. We're moving the needle from the shade sales to the van, to the programming, to the inclusiveness, to the Indigenous selections we now have. I've got, if you can see this, Julie, I've got goosebumps while I'm talking. I am just so happy and proud to be part of the library board. And you know, maybe I'm, again, maybe I'm too close, but I love taking the dogs for a walk and reading the stories on the side of the window at the Fleming branch, and you know, those bags of bargain books that you could buy. And you know, I thought one of the highlights to my year was reading The Paper Bag Princess and acting it out with our board member Joanna Kosas to the kids. I mean, it was dynamite. So thank you all that you do. Keep moving the needle. Keep breaking through those barriers and glass windows, and just keep being you. So I don't have a question, but I just had to sing our chairs and our CEO's praises tonight. So thank you, Chair McPherson, for indulging me. Thank you, Julie and Donna.
Julie and Donna, you can be very happy that we're on Zoom, because you would have had a huge hug and a big kiss coming your way, I'm sure, from the council. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to mirror my my library cohort as the shortest serving counselor. Again, I found that presentation fantastic. I love the video. Again, we talked about it at our last library board meeting. I just want to echo, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I believe it was Lincoln board or library board member Anna Murray, who said, again, just how impressive, not only, again, the last couple of years have been, but how impressive you and your team have operated over the last year. I think there was a lot of opportunity out there for status quo. And again, you guys really went above and beyond, not only to create new programming and to try to engage our community members, but to actually have the uptick and the uptake by our community members for that programming. And I think it shows in some of the numbers that you presented. And again, I do like numbers, despite what Councillor Patrieva had mentioned. But again, you see it, and I hear about it on a regular basis. I think I'm one of the councillors with younger generation kids right now. And again, I do see and hear it from their friends and their shorter community. And again, it's just great to see how things and how much of a difference the library board, the library can make in a community. And again, I just kudos to you and your staff for always being that shining light. And again, hats off to Julie. Just, it's amazing to see the changes that not only have happened in the short term, but that long-term plan, and see where we're going to be going. And it is exciting. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. Wow, I don't know how to follow the past two councillors, but as a previous library board member last term, I'm super impressed, Julie and Donna. And I watched that video, actually, I have to share, I watched it 3 times today because I just enjoyed it so much. I loved watching it. And fantastic report. You know, you've really engaged the community. You've worked through, very tough times with COVID and the restrictions, and the numbers show that, and the programming is just top notch. One thing that really jumped out and I'm super excited about is the summer mobile programming, because it can reach some of the rural areas where I am up in Camden and Tintern. That's just music to my ears. I'm very familiar. Years ago, we had the Toymobile. I don't know if you remember that program. So if you want to just give me some details, how will it work? Would it be like a specific day or afternoon or something that you would arrive, and what kinds of things you'd be doing?
Through you, Chair McPherson, to the councillor, or to the deputy mayor, excuse me. We are planning a schedule, Councillor Timmers. We will certainly be letting the community know when we're going to be where, and blasting that on social so we can get as many people out as we can. But I'll let you know too.
Sounds great. And just a suggestion for Camden, may I suggest the parkette in the core, Camden Fly Road, where our little library is, and we have a couple of benches, and it's a nice little, that might be a good location, central for people to get to. So thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Julie and Donna, thank you very much for your report. Fantastic. Curious with COVID and with what's, people's behavior, do you have any special events planned once things get back open to, let's say, like special events, let's say to attract somebody like me that doesn't typically go to the library, but may go to the library if they're, and I'm not asking for a free hot dog or a donut, but something that would draw people that perhaps don't typically go to the library to start going to the library. Has there been discussions with your groups?
Absolutely. Funny you should ask. You'll hear it here first this evening that we have an amazing program planned for August 25th, actually at the new museum, where we will feature a local chef and author and a local musical act, an entertainment style evening with food and beverage and library. I think it would just be right up your alley.
That, I appreciate hearing that, that could be something, I know enough about wine, but maybe I want to pick up a book on wine, to be a connoisseur of sorts. Right now, I'm not an expert. My wife's a better expert at wine, but perhaps I would want to go to the library after seeing or participating in something like that. So that's fantastic to hear, and keep up the good work, and look forward to the work you all do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I don't see any more hands, but just to kind of wrap up. So very, very good video and a very catchy tune. And I got to tell you that for whatever reason, when I was sitting watching the video, I had a vision of Councillor Pachariva playing the guitar, Councillor Russell playing, I think it was a fiddle in that video. So next time you watch that, just think of those two sitting in chairs, playing those two. I think it'd be fun.
We'll never be able to think of anything else now.
Love the strategy. Very interested in your strategic plans for Rittenhouse Library. I think you kind of teased us a little bit there in the video. So very interesting. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
So,
our pleasure.
There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell that Council receive and file the delegation by Julie Andrews, CEO, Lincoln Public Library, and Donna Burton, Library Board Chair, regarding the Lincoln Public Library 2020 Annual Report and Strategic Plan Update. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote. Devan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you, and that carries.
Great. So we are now considering item 6.2, the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.1, Lincoln Public Library Board Minutes of March 16th, 2021. Would any member of council like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? Seeing none. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that council receive and file for information the consent agenda inclusive of item 6.2.1 Lincoln Public Library Board Minutes of March 16th, 2021. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote. Devan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Renee,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Great, thank you. And we move to reports. We will now consider item 6.3.1, report FN-10-21 regarding funding requests for residential hospice Niagara expansion. Do members of council have any questions? Seeing none. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer to receive for information report FN-10-21 regarding the funding request for residential hospice Niagara expansion and approve the McNally House Hospice funding request of $115,000, $23,000 per year for a 5-year period commencing in 2022. I'll now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote. Van, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
thank you. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 6.3.2, report FN-11-21 regarding 2020 capital project contingency update. Do members of council have questions? Deputy Mayor Timmers, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. Through you to Lawrence, our Director of Finance. This is a great report, and I was really happy to see this today. It's very clear. I know there were questions around this during budget time, and my only question I have is regarding, I see the numbers, the 15 projects, the cost involved, and then the percentage of contingency funds. Is there a formula, and sorry if this has been answered in the report, but is there a formula on how we put a number to how much contingencies we would add to a project? I see 5.1%. Just wondering how we come up with that number.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Deputy Mayor Timmers. It's actually on a project by project basis. It would depend on the complexity, depend on the type of works. Engineering, so if I'm going to David Graham's area, Director David Graham's area, he would look at past history, past projects to try to assess where they've had challenges or potential cost overruns. They would look at market conditions and such, like right now with COVID, the material overruns, to try to figure out or guesstimate what costs would be or potentially be. So there's no set percentage you kind of ascribe. You kind of look at each project individually. You look at its phases, its components, complexity. A lot of factors go into it. So the 5.1 is an average over across all of those projects, but you'll notice some are higher and some are lower, and it just depends on the project itself.
So thank you for that. Just one other question. We have 8 projects of the 15 are complete and 7 more to go. I'm just, I don't know all the ins and outs and details of each project, but I do know that the costs of, many materials and services have really increased during COVID. Are we going to find that we've, allocated enough to cover off the next projects? Can you even predict that at this point? I don't know.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll actually turn that over to Dave Grant or Shannon, but quite honestly, I don't think, based on history, based on what's been spent to date, that you will have that cost overrun if the estimate and the project principles and estimation principles have been followed, because they usually try to consider escalating costs, inflationary pressures and such. But again, I will turn it over to my learned colleagues, both David Graham and Shannon McKay, to further elaborate.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, and thanks, Lawrence, for that. Yes, we would, we monitor market conditions as well. We also talk to our colleagues, what are other municipalities experiencing in terms of pricing on given tenders being issued to the market. So we do follow, trends very closely. But a lot of times, it can depend on just, the type of bids that you get at a certain period in time. So a lot can actually depend on when something is tendered and what the market conditions are at that time as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for the answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And we'll go to Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Wagner. Thank you very, very much for this report. Again, I think as Deputy Mayor Timbers had mentioned, it's something that we've been asking for a while. And again, it's great to see the numbers. Just a quick little question on the second last paragraph, remaining contingency funds, where it says the contingencies that are unspent will get reallocated back to their original funding sources. If it was against the levy, or if the capital project was built against the levy, where would those monies be reallocated back to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the shortest serving councillor, from the shortest serving director, that would go to the tax stabilization reserves, generally speaking. So for future years, if the money's not used, it could potentially reduce tax levy charges in future years coming forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you to our Director of Finance. Similar along the same lines, like we've been very good at not requiring the use of the contingencies, which is a good news story. I'm just concerned, I'm just wondering, when we are calculating our budget in the future, should we be looking at perhaps reducing that contingency amount with the hopes of thereby reducing the levy to, any possible increase to the levy to mitigate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Mikulik, great question. That will happen over due course. As I said earlier, it's based on history. So if we notice that cost overruns or changes in projects, as I say, if they're finding that they're not using contingency, or if the cost they've estimated for projects ongoing continually decrease, they will continue to tighten that margin. Conversely, if they find that they're having cost overruns over a set period of time or a set number of projects, it will conversely increase the contingency amount. So it's an ebb and flow kind of thing. And it depends on the projects, the complexity, history, and such like that. So it can go up and down. In regards to the tax levy for these specific projects, there was approximately 400,000 out of the tax levy used or potentially used to fund these projects. So it's really an insignificant amount of the total tax levy amount for 2020, which was about $18 million. So it represents about 2%. So it's not a huge amount. It's not necessarily a big, huge tax burden, but it is something that ebbs and flows based on project and based on history. So it can go up and down. Ideally, if it continues to stay low, or if we tend to find that our estimations are a bit high, it would ideally go down and be reduced accordingly.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I must commend staff and, for their effort in coming in at or under budget. It's just for bookkeeping sake, for finance sake, if it at all possible makes sense to perhaps trim that a little bit. And should there be a need or a requirement for additional funding of a project that goes over budget, that could perhaps be brought to council's attention.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Miklik, I wouldn't recommend going to, as you say, without building that contingency in. It would be kind of problematic. And again, I'll let my learned colleagues respond appropriately. You can imagine if you're in a major construction build and you have your contractors on site and you're running out of funds and you don't have council approval, you can end up with huge cost overruns because they could be allocating staffing resources, crews on site. It's something that you, ideally, in an ideal world, you should have a tight or pretty exact budget, but that added complexity, that time delay can actually create other problems in a project. It could delay projects, it could delay timing, it could increase costs because you're actually waiting for a decision to come following, and it may be a few weeks, it may be a week. Timing doesn't always necessarily work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon or Dave to add further comments if they have some.
Well, I appreciate that. You know what? Again, I've been on council for about the same time as Councillor Russell. So I come from a business world, not a municipal world. So I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate how things go and operate and timing with regards to being of the essence. So I do trust you and your staff and those involved to make the wisest decisions on behalf of the taxpayer. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Felt like I had to ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I do not see any further questions or hands raised. I would also echo the councillor's comments that this is a very good report, and one that we did spend a lot of time talking about at the budget, about contingencies. And this is exactly what I think we need to see. I would say that many of these projects are probably summer projects. So I guess I would ask the director, can we expect to see a follow-up report to this later on in the year to see where we are against the contingencies, and in that have any of the spending explained as you did for Charles Daly Park?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McPherson, I'm sure that Shannon, myself, and David would be happy to provide an update later in the year when more of the projects are completed or a significant amount have completed, to provide you a fulsome update.
Good, that'd be great. And, I mean, much of this is small numbers, small dollars. A large part of this is small dollars. You can pick 3 projects here that are the bulk of this report. And when you look at those 3 projects, it's how do we spend against those projects, and do we need to dip into the contingency fund in those 3, and why do we need to do it? Because I think we all know that we are trying to complete these projects without using contingencies. That's our goal. And that minimizes the impact, especially if you're using taxpayers' money to fund these projects. It's going to minimize that impact. It's not what we really want to do, to not use the contingency and roll it into to reserves for a rainy day. That's not what I'm would want to do. I'd rather hold it to the budget number and really not be finding a way to spend the contingency money, or be forced to spend the contingency money, and have that at budget time, so that we take a project, take the first one, we take that one, $2.6 million, we got $100,000 in contingency. maybe we ought to put $50,000 on that. If our history shows that, we're in pretty good shape, if something comes up, we've got some money behind it to not have these funds rolling right into reserves at the end of the year. So thank you, Mr. Director, for this report. Another really important report for us. And as I say, one that came directly out of the budget.
Thank you.
So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulik to receive and file for information report FN-11-21 regarding the 2020 capital project contingency spending update. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima, Councillor Rajima.
Sorry, something just happened with my computer. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. There being no additional reports to consider for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda, we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Chair JD Pachariva to assume the chair at this time for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. And I guess it's true, they save the best to last. So delegations. There are no registered delegations this evening for Community Services and Infrastructure Committee on the agenda. Consent agenda. There's no consent agenda items this evening. Reports. We will now consider item 7.3.1, report PW 18-21 regarding the William Street Community Safety Zone and approvals report. Do members of council have any questions? I see none. Oh, Councillor Brunei. You're on mute, my friend.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Not a question, but a comment. Just want to thank staff on behalf of both you and myself, you as chair and as my ward mate. We've been watching in the municipality community safety zones taking place in Vineland, on Victoria Avenue, on 4th Avenue, Serena, John Street, and we've been hearing from our residents for a number of years with Jacob Eames School and Mount Osborne Cemetery that there was a need for slowing down of traffic. And hopefully this will be the result of the community safety zone. So to staff, a big thank you on behalf of our residents in Ward 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Brunei. Yeah, and we heard this last year at our ward meeting, and when the talk of community safety zones came up, we reached out to Director Graham, and he brought this forward at lightning speed. So thank you very much, Director Graham. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Brunei. Receive and file report PW 18-21 regarding the William Street Community Safety Zones, approval report, and approve the proposed bylaw to establish community safety zone on William Street as outlined in the proposed bylaw under Appendix B. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. There are no confidential items this evening. Committee remarks. Do we have any committee remarks? I see none. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 8:12 p.m. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic